Do you ever find yourself hesitating to open trades? You just stare at the charts and think, it's not showing me what I need to see. And then annoyingly, the price ends up moving exactly as you expected. It's like you're waiting for the stars to align before you take an entry. If so, this video is for you. And even if you don't hesitate with your entries, trust me, this video will help your trading anyway. Now, when we make decisions in our everyday lives, we're always weighing up the probabilities of the situation, even if we don't realize we're doing it. Like if you're deciding what time to leave for work so you can avoid the traffic and get in on time, you might not know it, but you're actually thinking about various probabilities. The probability of traffic at different times and how that will affect the probability of you getting to work by 9 o'clock. The reason you're not aware of this is because we do it so smoothly most of the time. But when we're faced with difficult decisions where there's an uncertain outcome, suddenly that process gets jammed and we feel stuck. Like if you're making the decision about whether to move in with your girlfriend or not, you can't see into the future, so you don't know how she will change, how you'll change, whether it will make your relationship better or worse. So it might end up seeming like there's no right decision to go for and you get stuck. It's all about the uncertainty. This is similar to what we face in the markets, and luckily there is a solution to it. But before we get onto that, let's understand what the problem actually is. So imagine I have a deck of 20 cards. Some are red and some are blue, but you don't know how many of each of them there are. It might be 10 and 10, it might be 19 red, 1 blue. There's no way of knowing. Now I'm going to give you an option. The first option is that you can bet on either red or blue and turn over the next card, and if you guess the color right, you'll win $10. But if you guessed it wrong, you'll win nothing. So for example, you might choose red, and if you turn over the next card and it's red, you win $10. But if it's blue, you get nothing. Or the second option is that you don't have to bet on anything at all, and you can just get a guaranteed $3 instead. So which option are you choosing? A guaranteed $3 or the possibility of winning $10 if you guess correctly? Keep your answer in mind, and now let's play again. This time I'll give you the same options as before, but you now know that the deck has 10 red cards and 10 blue cards, so it's 50-50. Which option are you taking now? This example is used for testing something known as the Ellsberg paradox. As you might expect, more people are willing to take the bet in the second example. But the Ellsberg paradox also suggests that decision makers would rather take the choice with a transparent likelihood of risk, even in situations where the alternative would produce greater utility. You see, we really don't like uncertainty. In fact, a 2016 study found just how badly we cope with uncertainty. There was a group of participants and some of them were told that they were definitely going to receive a painful electric shock, whereas the others were told that there was a 50% chance of them getting it. The results of the study were fascinating because the people who were definitely going to receive the painful shock were actually calmer and less agitated than the ones who didn't know whether they'd get one or not. The thing is, our brains actually operate differently when we're faced with uncertainty. Now, before I explain why that is, let's make an important distinction. So back in the 1920s, Frank Knight famously defined two types of situations in his book, Risk, Uncertainty and Profit. This led to the term Knightian uncertainty, which is used when there's a lack of quantifiable knowledge about a possible outcome. Essentially, we can think of the difference as this. When we can quantify the probability of an outcome happening, we can refer to it as a risk. But when we can't quantify the probability, we can refer to it as an uncertainty, also sometimes called ambiguous uncertainty. So let's go back to that example with the decks of cards. One of these decks represents uncertainty and the other represents risk. Now, this card game and other similar activities were used in a neuroscience study, meaning brain research. They were looking at the neural differences between uncertainty and risk, and what they found was that there were different patterns of activation in the brain. The brain was dealing with uncertainty differently to how it would deal with risk. When there's uncertainty, we see more activation in areas of the brain associated with emotional information, the amygdala. This is where we have emotional responses like fear, anxiety, and aggression. And there's also a reduction in the anticipated rewards from our decisions. So in the study, they go on to say, under uncertainty, the brain is alerted to the fact that information is missing, that choices based on the information available therefore carry more unknown and potentially dangerous consequences, and that cognitive and behavioral resources must be mobilized in order to seek out additional information from the environment. And that basically explains exactly what ends up happening. When humans are faced with an uncertain situation, the optimal strategy that we use is something known as explore, exploit. Exploration means searching for things or trying different choices that we aren't familiar with in the hope of finding new rewards, whereas exploitation means choosing an option that is now familiar and has a higher certainty of reward and making use of that. An easy way to think about this mechanism is to consider what it would have meant for our evolutionary ancestors, and in fact we can even see it these days with survivalist TV shows. So I'm a big fan of things like Ed Stafford or Naked and Afraid, and if you watch those shows, you'll notice a consistent pattern that they follow, which I imagine our ancestors would do as well. It's basically explore, exploit. So first, they'll explore their uncertain environment, looking for where they can find resources. They try to find where there's a water source, where there's potential for food, and where there's a good spot to build a shelter. This exploration phase will go on for a while until they find something that's suitable, and then they'll exploit the area, they'll collect the resources and settle down. They don't know if there would be a better area if they explored further, but it doesn't matter. They settle and exploit what they've already found. Then, if things are going well in the future, they'll drift further afield during the day, knowing they have their main base already, so they can explore again before potentially exploiting any new resources that they find. By doing this, they turn an uncertain situation, which may eventually induce anxiety or fear in them, into one that feels much more comfortable and more certain. But the important thing here is that at some point, you need to switch from explore to exploit. However, in some situations, the uncertainty is never going to go away, and when that happens, it's been found that people will continue exploring and exploring, trying to find some certainty that doesn't actually exist. And this excessive information seeking can actually lead to high levels of stress and eventually burnout or an avoidance of information altogether, putting you in a much worse situation. And this is what tends to happen with traders. We never know exactly what will happen next in the markets because we're not fortune tellers. So when traders are faced with this uncertainty, rather than being able to switch into exploit mode, which would mean opening a trade, they just continue analyzing and go on an endless search for information, hoping to finally come across the certainty that they crave. It's a never-ending issue. So how can we solve this problem? Well, there are two things we can do, and the answer is actually already within what we've been discussing. The first step is to start trusting some of the information that you found that appears consistent over time. Rather than trying to find certainty in things, if there are at least some things that you can exploit, you need to take those. In fact, a study on expert judgment found that we use far less information when coming to a conclusion than we think we do. Most information that we gather to make a decision isn't actually contributing to our decision anyway. It just makes us feel more confident in our decision since we have a larger amount of evidence. But the decision itself doesn't change, so the additional information isn't really needed. So in practical terms for our trading, this means having a system where you know what information you're gathering and what the exploration cutoff point is. At what point do you consistently decide that you have enough information and it's time to either shit or get off the pot? Then the next step relates to the distinction between risk and uncertainty. We know that when we make the outcomes quantifiable, it engages different parts of our brain. We're no longer tapping into the emotional processing so much. Therefore, we need to make this happen. Now, the best way to do this is to start estimating the probabilities of the different outcomes that may happen in the market. To start with, you'll probably be pretty bad at this, but you can improve over time. In fact, that's been proven. But even if you're bad at it and the probabilities are wrong, you're still solving the issue of being hesitant about opening the trade. It's no longer an uncertainty, it's a quantifiable risk. And actually, estimating the probabilities of different outcomes in the markets, like your opportunities that you're analyzing, is important for many other reasons to do with your trading as well. In fact, in my opinion, it's the most important factor for successful trading. And we'll discuss that more in future videos, or you can check the link below for our free training where I explain it in a bit more detail. So if you think about it, those two steps that we just went through are actually tied together. You need a system for analyzing and collecting information where there's a clear cutoff point to say that it's time to stop exploring and start moving on to exploiting, potentially. And how do you decide what that point should be? Well, it's once you have enough information to start estimating the probabilities. This is what your trading system should be based around. And you know what? Let me leave you with a final bonus tip. This one is really important, and it's a mistake that I see most traders making. When you're assessing a potential opportunity, most traders will be asking themselves, is this trade going to end up being profitable? But it's impossible for us to know the answer to that question. And by asking ourselves that question, we're facing uncertainty. That's going to throw us back into exploration mode to try and find an answer to that impossible question. It leaves us hesitating to open a trade because we can't answer the question. Instead, what we should be asking ourselves is, would this trade fit with my trading system? Is this a legitimate setup for the way that I trade? Now, that's a question that we can answer with certainty because we're not relying on the uncertain future, we're relying on the criteria that we've laid out for ourselves. We have a system and we can easily compare whether this opportunity aligns with that system or not. And of course, if you don't have a system, then it's no wonder why you're hesitating to open trades. Now, if the trade ends up being a profit, great. If it's a loss, that's okay as well. Successful trading is about having a positive trader's equation. It's not about predicting the future perfectly and being right every time you do. Then, over time, we analyze our results to see if we're profitable or not. And if we're not profitable, that means we need to go to work on our system. So we can go through an optimization process, fix the flaws, change things around before going through that same thing again. And if you want to understand those final points in a bit more detail, check out the video that's on screen now. And don't forget to check out the free training that's linked below. And of course, thanks for watching. See you soon.